All right, so we're going to speak loud because it's loud in here.
Yes.
So if you have questions, we want this to be interactive. This is going to be more of a discussion. We have topics that we want to cover, but we'll try to pass that microphone or try to get one that's close to you to have you speak into it, because we're being recorded, and so the microphones are not attached to a speaker. It's attached to that camera back there. So just going to go through some quick introductions here, and then we'll introduce our topic. I'm Chris Doherty. I lead business development for Oars Partners. We are an outsourced recruiting services company working with emerging growth, venture capital-backed, and private equity-backed companies.
Thanks, Chris. I'm Marnie. I work with RSM. We're a professional services firm. I work in human capital. So all things HR and talent, we do consulting for our clients around those topics.
And I'm Jen Hartman. It's nice to meet all of you. I also work at RSM in human capital, helping our clients to transform their HR function. Prior to consulting, I was in HR in industry, manufacturing, and professional services. Excited to talk this topic. Are you guys excited? Yeah?
This is like Jen, Marnie, and I spoke a couple of times prepping for this. I've been in this for almost 30 years, and I have never seen anything. We have never seen anything like this right now in terms of the talent paradigm. The talent paradigm always changes, so that almost sounds a little bit trite to talk about, but we want to talk about the war for talent, attraction, retention, talking about skills gap, what companies are doing to combat a lot of these issues. And so we have kind of varying expertise, and so I'm going to open us up and talk a little bit about compensation inflation. So we always hear that companies join, or people join companies because of a manager or the value proposition that that company has, and that still reigns true. Compensation is usually number 3 or 4 why people stay or join a company. In today's market, it's pretty close to number 1. And so the Bureau of Labor Statistics is talking about 8.3% inflation in overall compensation rates. I had a client call the other day, say they lost just a Java developer with 3 years of experience, making $85,000 for a job making $135,000.
Wow.
So that's an exaggerated example, but it's still a very real example. And so we're advising clients right now to look at budgets, look at your value proposition, look at other things you can do outside of compensation in terms of attracting and retaining talent. One of the things that we started to talk about was the skills gap. So I know, Jen, you had a few thoughts around talking about what companies can do to combat that, upskill and things like that. So maybe you could share some thoughts.
Absolutely. Upskilling and reskilling is high on the priorities, and I would say this really is based on the turnover, based on a talent scarcity that we're seeing in the market. As Chris mentioned, I don't want to use the word unprecedented because that gets tossed around so much lately, but it really is the volume of job openings here in the market is truly incredible right now, which is really putting some pressure and creating skills gaps. In fact, a survey recently done by Gallup, HR leaders, 58% of them said that their companies were dealing with a moderate to significant skills gap, which is really helping them to focus on reskilling through development. So not only they're not limited to just looking at the market for external talent and competing with the Googles and the Amazons of the world who can really pay that high compensation, but they can really look at some internal, really utilizing their internal workforce and training them to get the low demand skills and kind of move them into the high demand skill area. Something you noted there, Chris, compensation is always important, but I will pick on you a little bit, just being in the HR background.
Go for it.
I mean, I will share something that in my previous life in HR, I had a team that I was working with that had really overwhelming turnover. And I get a call from the leader who was really upset on this particular afternoon, talking about how one recruiter had poached 8 of their people in the last couple months, right? And it's really egregious, right? But he was thinking it was the recruiter was to blame. The recruiter was the source of the issue, right? And so it was a really interesting conversation, and it ended up really taking a turn to, listen, the recruiter's not the source of the issue. There are some known issues with the culture, right? And this is really important to people. So I guarantee if we spend some time working through those issues, address those cultural issues, make your culture stickier, right? your people are not going to be as likely to pick up that call from the recruiter. So that's where we really landed. And with that, I want to segue because I think where we can really dig in is how that employee value proposition has changed with the onset of the pandemic and now into recovery. And what does that mean now for retention? Marnie, I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks. Does this resonate with you all, though? I mean, are you seeing the same thing? So, one thing is, as Jen said, the pandemic has really changed the way that people are prioritizing things, as we all know. I mean, we're probably doing it in our own lives as well. So while compensation is definitely important, employees are looking for more from their employer. So there's going to be a conversation around whether I stay or go and what's important. So there are a few key things. When we talk about culture, culture is really the values and beliefs that your organization has, and being able to transcend, in a lot of cases, the remote working environment is really important. And that's going to stay, because one of the things that we've seen and that you probably see in the press is that flexibility is a priority now. PwC, right, just announced that all 40,000 of their employees are going to be able to work remote. That's a firm that's a peer to us and to Deloitte. So I think that's the trend, right, where people are prioritizing flexibility. It doesn't just have to be remote, but they want options. They want to not have rigidity and say, like, tell me where to be and when to be there. They're going to prioritize the ability to look at their life and say, what do I need? I enjoy the time to drop my kids off in the morning, or I do my walk and my workout or whatever. And they may actually say, I will take a little bit less money if I can get those things. So the second thing that's becoming really important, or that has been important but is really like reaching a crescendo, is diversity. So most people, when they're looking at an organization, either at their own or others, is saying diversity is really important. I want a firm or a company that prioritizes diversity, and that's where there are some significant gaps. For every 100 men, only 86 women get promoted. So where we see some of those diversity gaps is really at that leadership level. You start out, you have a population of talent that is diverse, but really being able to keep them and grow them into leaders is key, because those leaders are the ones that are feeling the most burned out and starting to take a look and saying, like, is this a place where I can stay? And one thing that we know is that when managers prioritize wellness, and they also prioritize diversity, employees are happier and they're inclined to stay. And then a couple other things is that, and Jen kind of said it around upskilling, people want career, they don't want job. So it's more than my manager, it's more than the title on my business card, it's what is my career trajectory and how do I grow my skills? So it's all of those things that really are then transcending not just compensation, not just culture, it's like really everything all together. So that's what, it's challenging to get that all right, but those are the things that we're seeing. Are you seeing that as well when you're looking at candidates?
We are. And it is a weighted factor for different companies in different industries of all of the above, right? So we're talking about culture, training, skills, compensation, management, right? Is this a place that I can see myself being for a long time, which may sacrifice a little bit on the compensation side to be able to join an organization like that, to Jen's point and Marnie's point as well. The companies that are thinking about this are the ones that are getting ahead of the market. So I'll give you a quick story. We have a client that is in the assisted living nursing home space, and they're trying to hire thousands of certified nursing aides. So the people that are changing bedpans and sheets, generally unskilled workers that can come from any type of background. If they can pass a background check, they've moved their compensation up a little bit to be competitive, but what they're doing is training these folks to become successful in that career. If you stay for 3 years, they will pay for you to go to nursing school so you can become a licensed nurse. So now here's somebody that might be working in retail or another non-exempt hourly job that can see themselves in a path and a professional role if healthcare can become their passion or is a passion for them. These are the companies that are thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead to create that value, to get employees to want to become part of that and say, we really care about you. We think you have a future here, and we're going to put our money behind it, training and time. So we're seeing companies that are doing that, but those that are still saying, we have a job, you should be happy to be here, those are the companies that are going to fall behind. And frankly, there are people that still have those attitudes that are out there trying to advise against that. So To pause for a moment, are you guys seeing anything different than what we're talking about in the market? Agreement, consensus?
Should have gave us more slack.
I've been doing operations, supply chain, demand planning, 20 plus years, and I got into this because I saw how like you're saying, the talent is changing, and where can I bring the most value, right? So employers, they need this. This is a skill, like you're saying, like there has to have this skill. Someone has to do this. It's like the backbone.
Right.
But now everybody's like, I don't want to do this. It's not fun. Where am I going to go with this? I could make money doing this. You know, there's a lot of more choice and option. So, like you're saying, if you see a company that's like, well, you know, they're a smaller company, not so much culture, they're getting 0 applicants, 0. And the higher, you know, you got the top 5, obviously everybody wants to work there. You got brands that people are like, I know this brand, I love this brand. Now what's going to happen to job XYZ? They still need the help, but they don't know how to come and talk to you, right? Another thing I'm saying is that, just from my field, they expect the world.
Yes.
Let me tell you, if you have a statistical degree and you're very good in math, which you know a lot of the, you know, that's one of the steps, what's the likelihood you're going to be a demand planner? Not likely. And that's a supply chain function for people that don't know that, right? You're going to be the machine learner. You're going to be you're going to go with the top 5, you know, Apple, Facebook, Google. You're going to be in those, you know, fancy companies.
Yep.
What about everyone else, right? What about people that didn't know that that's something they want? So I decided to do something about it and change that up. Take, you know, because I've seen it, because I've done this so many times, I could do this with my eyes closed in a sense. So for me, it's connecting someone that needs the help, right? You might not even need it full time. You might think you need it full time because you don't know enough. Go to the recruiter, you go to it, they're like, well, this is what you need. You need someone with a business degree. You have to have 5 years experience,
Yes.
and they need this and they need that. Do you really need that? You know, so I started helping people that are younger and saying, well, this is the main gist. This is what you need. So that's basically my gist. So I've been seeing that a lot. What I saw the shift with the pandemic is first, everybody was like laid off and everyone was scared. And we're like,
Yeah.
here you go, another recession. We're going towards, no one's going to find a job. And then it turned around so quickly after we got the unemployment that all of a sudden nobody wanted a job. It was like, wow, in my lifetime, I've never seen that, right? And now all of a sudden there's choice. Even listen, my son is 18, and you know, an 18-year-old, you think you want to do anything for 15, 20 bucks an hour. Guess what? That's not the case anymore. We're dealing with a whole new generation that see things differently.
Yep.
And they feel like, I don't need to be sitting here 9 to 5. I could
Right.
be doing eBay, or I could be doing YouTube, or I could be selling, you know, cryptocurrency, and that's going to get me by. But that's okay because, you know, this is what my values are. So now everything's changing so quickly. I guess the question that I want to ask is, where do we see this going? Is this like a 1-2 year thing? Is this a 5-10 year thing? Or what do we see next? Like what's coming up?
I don't think this is going away. I mean, I think that what organizations are finding, and you bring up a good point around some of those low skill functions, let's say, where it's very repeatable, and you probably could speak to this. Organizations are looking, going, do I need to have this in-house or can I outsource it completely? Do I need to hire talent? Do I need a full-time employee to do this? Or can I just have a service that is going to do that and commoditize that work, and that way you have some, and there's a lot of different models to that, but you have some ability then not to have to worry so much about the headcount per se. So that's one thing. But I do think, and Sophie, you probably can talk about this, like when you have new hires that are coming into an organization, and you're going to experience this coming out of school, of how they get integrated and onboarded and understand that employee value proposition. Even if you have, you know, a cool brand, or if there's something there that's attractive, it's still integrating somebody and showing them what the culture is, and that there are things that they can see, that it's not a dead-end job and that there is a career path. and being able to move people within the organization. I do a lot of work with manufacturing, and manufacturing a lot of times feels the same way. It's like a dead-end job. Like, why am I going to come out from school and manufacture windows and all that kind of stuff? But there are so many things that are on the horizon that are technology-driven, that people can learn, and that you make the investment. And I think that's what organizations are going to start doing. You come to work for us, we make the investment in you, and then people are going to see that as the value proposition to grow, and maybe it takes them somewhere else. I mean, Amazon is running all those commercials now of like those personal stories saying, I started an Amazon warehouse, and then, the commercial, right? Like, and then my mom got sick, and then I wanted to be a nurse, and they pay for my nursing, and then I'm like paying it forward, So I feel like that's going to be what we continue to see, and no one's going to say, yeah, sign me up for an hourly wage and a dead-end job, and I'm going to stay here. We're always going to have that turnover.
I mean, I think you might see a slow trickle of some of the folks who left the workforce temporarily come back in. So people who might have had to do childcare and that took priority. We saw a real slowdown in any immigration, right? So there's a little bit of that scarcity based on those things. But I also, to kind of build on what you're saying, there's also a bit of a generational trend. So you're talking about your son, Generation Z, right? And that very much is what they're looking for. They're looking for a company who's going to invest in them. And I've heard it talked about as kind of this transformational career, right? You're going to help grow me, invest in me. You're going to mentor me. These are all the things that are really important in what they're evaluating, not just the brand, but their experience with a company. And it's not just based on, why they join a company, but it's also why they stay. Right, and what kind of opportunities and career paths are presented to them along the way. You talk about manufacturing, I thought you were going to go into mobility, which is something that manufacturing does really well. So larger companies have all of these robust career paths within because they're able to move people around, and companies are getting better and better at aligning that to the employees' interests, right? So what kind of skills do they want to grow? You probably see a lot of this at Deloitte, right? People moving around based on their interests and skills. And it's also very helpful for the employer, too, because think about how disruptive the pandemic was. I don't need these skills here anymore. I need them over here. And so being able to deploy people in a more agile way, move them around while giving them better career experiences is a win-win, in my opinion. So I think we'll see more trends and more technology really geared at enabling mobility in a bigger way.
Well, what's interesting too is I think the way, especially that generation, and even like my son is 11 and he's also talking about a YouTuber, and I'm like, no, that's not a job. So we need to choose something else. But a lot of times now, I think that people they are looking to make an impact, and they're looking to be measured in a different way. So it's not how many hours did I work, or like in our business, we're measured on how many hours we're billing to a client, but really like being measured on outcomes and having that correspond to how you're rewarded, that's what people are looking for. So if I have a value that I provide the organization, and I can do it in 4 hours versus you expecting me to sit here for 16 hours a day and do this job, that's not going to work for me. I'll go somewhere else where my outcomes and value can be measured and rewarded. And so a lot of organizations are looking at it that way too, measuring with things like OKRs and other ways to actually look at people's value and productivity more than like the time you sit at your desk, basically.
Yeah, and we don't see a lot of changes coming to this, Rena, to your question. I mean, markets will correct themselves over time, but this pandemic will have an everlasting effect on how the workforce is viewed, how it's treated, where it's located. So we were talking to clients that are saying, we want to go back to more of a hybrid model. I said, well, a hybrid model is still location-based. Because even if you only go 1 day a week, it means it's really about being on site 5 days. If we're attracting somebody, they have to be in that sort of 25 to 50 mile radius. Companies that are more flexible with that. Now, again, these are for jobs that don't necessarily need to be located, not for retail or manufacturing, distribution, healthcare jobs that need to be on site. Different story, different approach. But I think we're going to see that and a change in specialization and subject matter expertise. So to Marnie's point, I think you're going to see a lot more outsourcing of key, important, but not core to the business functions. So Rena, when you think about your business, outsourced supply chain, outsourced accounting, outsourced recruiting that I'm in, looking at Jeff's background in data, healthcare, consulting, right? People are going to look at subject matter experts and be able to manage that function, because to be able to build that internally and scale with the volatility in the market, to be able to attract and retain talent, there's still going to be a very high percentage of volatility that's happening that I think you have to account for going forward. So while I think things will get better and people will get smarter about how to hire and how to retain and apply all of these things, the amount of noise in the market is still going to be very high. And so I think even doing that's not going to be enough. And how do you approach that? So a lot of shifts to that paradigm.
Yeah, and I also feel that, workforce, right, when it comes to different age brackets, everybody wants different piece of the puzzle. Like as you said, for 18-year-olds or 11-year-olds, their values are different. The way they want to express themselves. Maybe someone who is in the 40 to 50 bracket, or elder to that, maybe they are more focused about secure, like health insurance, life insurance. Maybe someone like me who is also a Gen Z, just subtle Gen Z, but just made it to Gen Z. So even I would care more about hey, what is the work I'm doing? Is it having a profound impact?
Right.
Am I being like how valued is my work? I should feel that empowerment and valued in whatever work that I do, besides compensation. Even you mentioned that, like how I should feel that, the kind of work I'm doing is very relevant to my skill sets. When it comes to upskilling, right? I've noticed with consulting, things change very dynamically. And it's more like, sure, you have all these laundry list of things which you can do to upskill, but then when you're actually put on a project, you're doing something completely different. So there's a huge disconnect. So not only you are not leveraging the skill set which you learned, if in the future, if you're gonna, let's say I'm learning machine learning, I did all the courses, but now I'm put on a project which is to do with data migration. I'm on that project for a while.
Right.
And then again, I'm gonna put on a project which has to do with machine learning. I've lost a year's time, but I'm not leveraging my skill, because it's something you need to keep practicing. When it comes to coding, maths, it needs to be something consistently done. So not only you have lost a year's time, you have to again put your money into reskilling. So that's a huge loss for the company. And part of the culture is so many of these things and technologies keep changing, but some of the things which won't change is mentorship, like that apprenticeship, the things you learn from your seniors. That is something very hard to replace. And connecting, let's say, my interests about, let's say there's this person, this manager whom I aspire to be, and how do you map my interests so that this is the career path I'm put forward to, and that person, my mentor, is actively involved in my growth, because in turn I'm going to be stepping into his or her shoes and be contributing to the firm. So that's something during this pandemic I felt that I just started working 9 months ago, and my experience, my company has been just 2 monitors. That's Deloitte for me. And you kind of feel, everybody's going through it, you kind of feel lost through the process. You don't meet people in person, everybody is going through this. So I feel that when it comes to career growth, right, not only just you're rising up the ranks, you're developing as a person. So you need that mentorship, someone to be there who is actively part in your journey, in your growth. And that makes the whole job so wholesome, rather than just, hey, this is X work I need to do and I need to do it in so many hours. There's so much more to that, so much more to work.
And I think that is really one of the biggest takeaways, that it's not one size fits all for everyone. And depending on the industry that you're in, depending on the population, the generations, because there are a lot of industries where their population is going to age out. They are going to retire, and then there is going to be this vacuum of knowledge that is going to leave with them. So how does that group then take along, the younger generation, to teach them outside of the technology and the skills that you need from a tactical perspective? But I think from just speaking experience about our firm, I think what they've done really well is like reach out and survey and try and understand, where are we? What are we hearing from our people? What are we doing? Stay interviews, like with the people who've been there for a while, that have been through the ups and downs, and saying, once you have people leaving, it's too late to really gain any insight from them. They've had a bad experience, they're already out the door, but the people who are staying and that ride the wave, there's reasons why they're staying, but there's also reasons why they would go. And so I think that organizations really need to take a look at managing all of the generations and all of the, because you're right, like it's different. Everybody's motivator is a little bit different. So these are the trends, but it doesn't mean that some of your key talent is feeling that way. And so I think you really need to understand that and then hone in on it.
Absolutely.
It wasn't that it was bad. As you move forward with your career, I found out that some of the kids that I was training were after 2 years getting almost as much money as me.
Right.
Just because I stayed along and grew my career, that I was able to mentor, and that was a joy to me. That's why it was like a preview of what I'm doing now, because that really helped me. Kids coming out of college, helping them to really gain that first experience. But I didn't realize how underpaid I was, because things changed so much. And my field, it wasn't, when I started, there was no big data. There wasn't like, like I started going to FIT, going to fashion. That's where I learned trend lines and all of that, because that was one of the few places, fashion and beauty, that was a big thing. But then after going to 2009 crash, and then Facebook and all these other companies got huge amounts of data. Now all of a sudden that skill set was exponentially needed. But Lord and behold, I'm still working in my day-to-day, my corner, my life. It's not like all of a sudden it was like a correction of be like, now we see the marketplace is this. Then after talking to these young kids, I straight out asked them, I'm like, why are you leaving? I'm like, this is a great job, great place, great culture, this and that. And they're like, well, I'm going to be making this amount of money, working at this. I almost fell over. Think from my perspective, these are kids that I trained. Yeah. All of a sudden, we're now, in theory, in the same price range. How's that possible? Lord and behold, right? Figuring out after start doing the due diligence for myself that I've done all these years for my job, and I was like, man, if I took the time to learn the game, I was literally, after that year, next job, I made 35-40% more, because now I knew what to ask for, I knew what was my value. I think a lot of people, and listen, just from my world of operations, once you have this stable job, right, this was the game, stable job, you gotta continue forward, keep the job, right, make them happy, but once you started seeing that, how am I supposed to stay with the company that was there, like they were family to me, it was hard for me to leave, but I had to do it to progress my career. How am I supposed to stay knowing that someone literally after 2 years could make almost the same salary as me? It was ridiculous.
Yep. Yeah, but there is an alternative to that, and that's where I think a lot of organizations get stuck in this mode where you have compression. You have new people coming in, making a premium, and then you have your solid performers that you start to compress the salaries, and those adjustments need to be made. So companies need to look at their salary bands every year and make adjustments for those people, otherwise they will lose them. Because then the only way that you can increase compensation is by leaving.
Right.
And that
they give you no other option, basically.
Yeah, you have no other
It's a reactive way of looking at it, right? Internal equity has to be accounted for. But you're also seeing a shift in HR becoming more of an individualized practice. HR legacy has been sort of a broad stroke across the enterprise for years. So you're looking at, okay, here are the benefits. Here's what the compensation looks like. Here's what our employee engagement model looks like. Now you're talking about, are my people looking to make more social impact? Does my CEO value DE&I? Right? I've worked with CEOs that are saying, well, I just want to hire the best people. And I'm like, well, have you looked at the top performing companies and their stock prices attached to those that are most diverse? Because you're getting viewpoints that you always think you have a right answer and you may not, and you may need to open your mind. There's a different answer from somebody who grew up in a different environment than you did, right? And so people that are starting to value that, embrace that, and open up to that are those that are going to perform better. Right, and that's where when you tie in, while compensation is becoming more important, I didn't want to over-exaggerate my example, it's something you have to account for right now. Obviously, you lived it a little bit. Companies that are not thinking about all of those other components, especially in today's market, it's getting accentuated. And let's be honest, I mean, we have the majority of CEOs and leadership teams are baby boomers and Gen X, grew up in a different environment. And, I can't get anything from these younger people. I don't connect or whatever. Well, figure it out. Talk to somebody. Open your mind a little bit, because you're seeing a very pragmatic approach to something that should be very simple by people just being stubborn, and those are the ones that would fall behind. I don't know. You guys probably see the same thing that I do.
Absolutely. I also would add something you see companies don't do as well is evaluating and recognizing the people like yourself who are the culture carriers, the people who take time to develop people. We saw in a recent article, DE&I, there are certain people who are really carrying the torch and that goes unnoticed, right? And those are the very people that you need to create that cultural change and the people who are going to change the minds of leadership. And I don't know, I go back and forth whether it's something it's harder to measure, this people development traits and results, because you can measure something like productivity much easier, right? So maybe it's a hard thing to measure, or maybe it's certain leaders just place emphasis on, productivity versus, so I think there's a little bit of reconciliation needed when you look at your reward system as well. And you all make great points around just, it seems very obvious now. DE&I is so important. You are losing talent if you are not on board with it. And I think we're winding down on time here too. So I guess, are there any questions or closing points?
No, just appreciate everybody's time here today. The only one question that I wanted to ask, and I want to pose it to the two of you, is we're talking a lot about concepts that are important, but also pretty general. Are there any differences that you're seeing in like small to mid-market companies versus how the Fortune 1000 is treating some of these topics? I know you guys have a pretty diverse group of clients, so.
I would say because of the budgets that the larger companies have, they are more often the ones who are adopting these concepts and technology applications that enable it. And so they're usually first, so all the things we were talking about today with like really formal and great mentor programs or having a really robust mobility program and the technology to back it. So I think you're seeing slower adoption in those things, which I'm really excited to see when it kind of cascades now to the middle to smaller market where it becomes the norm and they're ready to invest in those areas. Marnie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have seen some smaller mid-market companies that are innovative because they're not big and they don't have as much red tape, let's say, to be able to design policy that's unique, and they're doing a lot of creative things. Like I think about the client we just spoke to, like they have an option around compensation and there are pros and cons to it, but they're basically giving their employees, do you want a heavy base option? Do you want a heavy annual bonus option, or do you want an equity plan? What do you want? It's very hard to manage, but because they're small, they're able to have that flexibility. So I think there are a lot of small companies that are trying things that are really unique and trying to differentiate themselves from their bigger competitors.
Great point. They could be more nimble that way, right?
Absolutely.
As opposed to the large organizations. Great point.
And I will say, and we can finish, changes and adoption of how talent is viewed, accepted, and trained and moved forward within an organization is going to drive the future of Wall Street over the next 5 to 10 years. And so I've made it a personal thing just because I'm in this space and it's what I know. I try to invest in companies that have valued talent, or at least that you read about have valued talent, or maybe I know that personally. It's served well, and I think that's really what we're going to see. It's that important. It's that big, and it's going to be from companies that get invested in all the way through to M&A and IPOs, and from the earliest stage companies, even to the mom and pop shops. We're looking at our experiences going out to dinner, and companies are, it's tough for restaurants to get workers. It's absolutely everywhere. So it hits our daily lives, it hits our work lives, for our friends and families, and so. We're pretty passionate about this and appreciate everybody's time. Does anybody have any last questions before we finish up?
I have a question regarding skills. So I know we've been talking about skills a lot, and it's more of like developing those hard skills when they come to companies. And what I was learning in a lot of my classes is that a lot of companies are finding that people who are recently graduated, they're missing those soft skills. And especially when we're going into more of like this virtual space, it's very hard to develop those soft skills, and that's where normally like people are doing it. Are you finding those skills lacking in your companies, and how are companies going to go about like developing those soft skills, which are really important?
Yeah, that is really important. It's a really great point, and I think some of it is
Great question.
It is a really great question, and I don't know that there's one answer, but and I used to do a ton of campus recruiting. We always used to talk to the colleges about what they can do, and a lot of things were build executive presence, train you on how to interact, because that too is a generational thing. Like there are a lot of our clients, or where you're used to texting or emailing, where you now need to be able to articulate things in a way where you're having verbal communication, and building those skills are important. And even business writing, like business level writing, some of those skills that are not necessarily taught in school. So there are some of those things that you could seek out as electives. I think for us, a lot of times, and you probably could speak to this, like you grow those skills with time. You have to have an opportunity to flex that muscle and be able to, even if you're not 100% confident, like be put in the room and then just try. Like just continue to be able to some of it is kind of nuanced in the remote world, but to be able to lead meetings and to communicate and reach out. And I think that there are some things that I've seen some of our offices do where they offer Toastmasters, let's say, to train younger staff on here's how you can get comfortable speaking. But I think a lot of it is just trying and practicing. Would you agree?
I think a lot of career offices too right now are very focused on career readiness programs and actually training people to communicate and train people to present and have an effective presence. You can go through all of that in college, use that in front of your professors, in front of your whatever it is you're talking to, but until you get in there and feel that imposter syndrome, feel that all eyes on you, it's not the same thing. You have to kind of dive in. So yeah.
Yeah.
I have a last food for thought for you guys from HR. So let's say an employee. They say you ask what you get. You only get what you ask for, right? So if let's say like an employee is not unhappy, and maybe like most of the folks don't take that step to ask, and they just go with it. And they find their job is not fulfilling, and they're unhappy due to various reasons, and compensation or whatnot. And then they make the decision to switch the company. And if the recruiting firm, like if the talent wants to keep them, it's really tricky because they have already made their decision to move forward. So
you never counter.
So how do you, before they made the decision, how do you act upon it before they make that decision? So how is it that you would do that? Or how is it that the talent is more actively involved with ever-changing demands, and they can be let to make a decision of that sort. So how do you reach there before they go up to that point that if they're unhappy, they're just going to move from the company?
I think a lot of it has to go back to the culture, right? I see that if you have a really rich culture, employee-friendly, giving them the kinds of things that help them in their day-to-day, they're less likely to become disengaged and make that decision. I also think that's where coaching and having really good frontline managers comes in big, so that you can really be in that with them, where you can be detecting any disengagement early on, having coaching conversations. I really think frontline managers have such a big part to play, and organizations should be training them more on how to get involved, how to coach, we call it re-recruiting at RSM. You should be re-recruiting your talent early and often, right? How are you re-engaging them? So I think that's where I would really invest in terms of retention, and then everything we just talked about with culture, right? That's how you kind of circumvent that person from leaving. You guys say anything else?
But on the flip side, were you going to say something? But on the flip side, I think it is incumbent on the individual too to express what you need, right? Like even any great frontline manager won't be able to read your mind around what you need. And so I think it's twofold. The organization needs to be ready to accept that and then do something about it. Because the worst thing is if you express what you want, or at least what you're dissatisfied with, and no change is made. That's almost worse. So I think there needs to be a balance between empowering employees to speak up for themselves and what they need, and doing it in a way that is feasible to address. So it's probably a combo of those two.
And actually we're seeing a lot more trainings on this, how to advocate for yourself as employees, how to build that skill and get comfortable doing so. And so I think that's a great point.
Yeah, the disengaged and untrained manager usually causes a lot of these things up front, but the employee, and it's to your point with soft skills, don't be afraid to fall down, right? Yeah. Have those conversations. People are expecting it. They want to hear the feedback, right? A good manager will want to hear that feedback, and you need to feel good and prepared to have that conversation. But don't go in fearfully thinking, all right, well, if I sit back, and then usually it's either too late or it causes sort of a deterioration in that relationship, and you start to view the organization a little bit differently than you did when you got involved. So, I mean, just, be honest with yourself, have fun with it, be open. I know it's not easy for everyone to be able to do that, but you have to do it in your own way, right? That fits into your personality. I mean,
Like when you said, you're teaching yourself how to advocate for yourself, because most of us, we learn it on the job.
Yeah.
There's nobody telling us how to advocate yourself. You just go through life. You just go through it and you learn.
Well, what we're talking about, you have the bargaining power today, right? The market is on your side. So
yes,
the time
it is.
now.
Your window is open.
I have a different question. So you talk about, being in college and the things you guys need. What do you suggest for kids that are starting out? Like in my field, experience is the game, right? Because when you deal with math, like you're saying all these things, like you were mentioning about the reskilling, you're starting from square one. A lot of companies, either if they know that, they don't really want to pay, and then you have to get X amount of years, or other companies want like 2, 3, 4 years experience because they want someone to just start moving, right? What do you suggest for kids that are literally coming right out of college and, it's like the cart before the horse. I need the experience, but I can't get the job to get the experience, right?
Yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, I think that, I don't know if there's a certain area that you're speaking about from an expertise standpoint. I think in some cases that's true, but mapping out, there are a lot of organizations like ours, like other apprenticeship programs that, depending on where, and it's hard for students because I think you need to map out where your endpoint is. What am I targeting? And then be able to put the plan in place to get there. But there are a lot of organizations that will invest in talent, have apprenticeship programs, have internship programs, have training programs where if you want to get in somewhere, you get your foot in the door and that's what you start doing to get to your next step. But you need to know the skills that you want to build.
You also have to be well-researched, too. So I tell, whether it be college grads or somebody even coming out of a skilled trade program, right? We can't forget that. So if we think about a high school graduate that's gone in for skilled trade, maybe trying to get into a union. But let's stick with your question. If a student is looking for those roles and they're saying, all right, these 4 companies only want this experience, you need to be proactive and do your research because there are probably 12 companies that are out there and maybe 7 or 8 that actually do value what we're talking about. Those other companies will eventually slip and have to sort of rethink their strategy because we've seen that over and over. That won't change. So to be proactive and well-researched, to be able to find Google and find an organization like RSM and start reading and saying, wow, I didn't know about that. Work with your dean, work with your professors, have conversations with them. The career fairs are always nice, but it's a very sort of macro level event. But if you're looking to build relationships and network with a future employer, odds are there are people that that are part of your ecosystem that will be able to help you land there. And that was my experience coming out of school. You got lucky, but I think I increased the amount of luck that I had by having a lot more conversations maybe than people thought that they would, and networking. That's it. So.
That's great. Thank you.
I think we're...
thank you for all your
Thank
questions.
you. That was
This is
fun.
awesome.
I think we're wrapped up. Thank you guys so much.